Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Death and Other Details, Season 1, Episode 4. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we rewind time about 6 months, and we see the introduction between Sunil and Jules, or who we believe to be Jules. We actually never find out his real name, but either way, he put on this whole stage performance to get Sunil to give him a job, because he already knew that Sunil had fired his previous head of security, which we don't know what those circumstances were for. Whatever the case may be, quote unquote Jules saw an opportunity. But I'm curious, we never actually found out fully what was his motive, because we find out this episode that he's harboring Ukrainian stowaways, but it's is that all there is to it? Was that always the plan, to get on a ship for their sake, or did he have other reasons and then this came along? It's he was planning this that far in advance. I thought that was interesting, because they never presented any other reason why he would be on the boat other than that. So because we know he's a criminal and stuff like that, but maybe it's a situation of, yeah, he has this criminal history, but maybe it's a thing of, I want to do... Because we're not done with Joel's story. We can't be, because I'm jumping ahead a lot, but even when it's all said and done, he's still on the ship. He never left. But I'm because we got the photo, the woman, the twin brother potential. So it's there's still way more to that story. I'm so curious to see where that takes place, where that all goes, interestingly enough. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see. It was also interesting, too, because I was completely wrong last episode. Jules is doing his own thing. He has no correlation with Layla, which I kept being wow, I'm surprised we have not circled back to that. Because, so it's that is interesting. You just happen to find this spot, or maybe Layla saw him, because Layla is very observant, and she probably keeps tabs on a lot of people, maybe a lot more tabs on the ship than we kind of gave her credit for. Jules might not have been the only one that was hiding amongst this group. But because we never circle back to Layla until the last 2 scenes of the episode. We'll talk about that when we get to the discussion throughout the entire episode. But I thought that was so fascinating. But because they are looking for Jules, they end up shutting the whole ship down. Everyone has to stay where they are. Kind of an awkward position for Trip and Alexandra to be in. It's also got to be a little weird because Catherine's also stuck on deck as well, which is so interesting how that pairing ends up being what it is, because later on Alexandra's thinking that, hey, you set me up for murder, or at least Lawrence did, because he's the one that is potentially the one who had me try to get close to Keith, and the bar cart was what was used to commit the murder, so on and so forth, right? So, why is he setting me up? Blah, 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 blah. Catherine didn't really give her an answer. She's just hey, I'm asking as your friend. And then she made this whole metaphor about, I'm not on your strings. Which I was oh, that's interesting. Because I made, kind of the puppet metaphor last episode referring to Alexandra having the strings. But I also made the point of, you don't realize you are being puppeted. And that comes back at the end of the episode, because she's getting blackmailed. And the person specifically used the phrase strings. So either that's Lawrence with his ear to the ground, or that was Catherine making a point. Or not unless there's a third... No, because it's it could be a third party that's involved, where it's maybe it isn't 100% Lawrence, but maybe it's someone else on the boat Lawrence is associated with that made that happen. But the only person that was, I was about to say the only person that was around who'd be involved in all this was Catherine, because she's the one Alexandra said it to specifically, but who knows? Because, Catherine's not the only one telling her to basically fall in line. So was the priest dude, and obviously he's got his connections to the Colliers as well. So, I don't know. It feels like it's too obvious for it to be Catherine who sent that message. But, it's it feels like it's a third party, meaning Lawrence wasn't the one who sent the cart. It was someone else. Like I said, it probably was someone else on deck, because the only person who knows all the names and faces is the priest. I'm sure even the Colliers probably don't even have like access to all that information, because there's supposed to be separation, at least between Alexandra and all of this, because that way like there's plausible deniability, because having that mediator in between means there's no direct correlation between you and the person that's giving you money to, do what you're doing, but also do what they want you to do. The only like people she has I don't know if they're fully like related to the super PAC, or they kind of their own thing, or they kind of both, the Colliers and Alexandra. I don't know how their situation works. She's well enough aware to be here on the boat with the Colliers, because obviously they funded her and stuff. So I don't know. Like I said, it might just be plain and simple. Like, no, it is Catherine who sent the message. I might just be like overcomplicating things, thinking it's someone else. It just felt a little too easy for it just to be Catherine, but we'll see. During their search everywhere, we ultimately end up finding, we finally found, lawyer dude, which he's not talking. I'm like, first and foremost, I'm like, why won't you talk? I mean, I guess it's like, right, you don't want to admit your kink, because if you notice, he still had he was still tied up. He didn't have the ball gag. He also had he still had the collar on, so I'm like, we already know this is some kinky shit, so like, why are you, I mean, but it's like, yeah, you're a lawyer, you never want to admit anything, maybe that's what that is. But also, we find out what his whole shtick and situation is, so maybe that's double the reason why he didn't want to expose it, because it's like, yo, it's my situation, I'm not about to blow it up, I'm also, like, keeping quiet because it's part of our, like, dom-submissive relationship. I thought it was actually an interesting reveal to find out that Teddy was a dominatrix. Because I think I'd thrown that out there last episode of like, is that what that money exchange was about? Because we never went back to like why Teddy gave the lawyer like got like a suitcase of money from like the lawyer or whatever. But I'm like, oh, I was like, was that kind of for all this? And it's like, yeah, it turns out like I feel like I said that when maybe that was last episode. I don't remember. I say so much bullshit comes flying out of my mouth during these that like I don't I don't remember half the shit that comes out of my mouth when it comes to some of these reviews. But I think I said that at one point in time. But maybe that's me just trying to give myself past me too much credit. But yeah, it turns out Teddy's a dominatrix. Kind of makes sense. I definitely remember. I thought like, there's no way it's like. At first, I was like, "There's no way it's Lawrence or something, is it?" Because yeah, I think I posited that at one point in time. Like just there's some like shenanigan affair things going on, which there kind of are, but either way, kind of makes sense. Teddy needed her own release because she had that conversation like last episode with Winnie as well as the rest of her family about the whole conversation of like all these rich people, basically she'll bend over backwards for them because it's part of her job and she doesn't like the rich, she hates the rich, and it's like, right, I have to do whatever they want at any moment's notice. It's just insufferable. So she needs to de-stress. It's kind of like the opposite end of like a CEO, where it's like, I made that reference of like, oh yeah, CEOs like getting their balls stepped on and humiliated and stuff like that, right? Once again, that's the cliche or like the stereotype, right? Well, obviously, like her job being as stressful as it is, you need an outlet. So it isn't just about, I mean, I guess that's where you kind of get Owen, the lawyer, where it's like, yeah, that's his job, so stressful and stuff like that. He needs to release, but Teddy also needs to release too, because I think she's basically at the behest of so many other people in her day-to-day job that at nighttime, for her, it's like, I get to be someone else. She also gets to take back a little more control of her own life, especially considering like her day-to-day life isn't just working. She's also taking care of her family, making sure they're taken care of and have jobs. Once again, most of the staff, not most, at least a good chunk of the staff is her family. I should say some, because we actually don't know how much of the staff is actual family. We know some people are, but not everyone. So I kind of obviously skipped a lot because I talked about them a little bit, but going back to Ukrainian stowaways, amongst them is a daughter, Yeva, which I'd seen that actress like amongst the cast, and I was like, why does she look so familiar? And the reason why I recognize her is because she was in the show Paper Girls. It's been a minute. I want to say her character's name was Max, but I could be mistaken. That's just one of those shows I'm so bummed about. I was like, oh man, I really like that show, and I hate that it got canceled. It's such a bummer. But either way, Yeva likes to sneak off through the ventilation, and it seems like she's potentially a witness for what happened to Danny, but it turns out no, she's only a witness to what happened with lawyer dude and Teddy. What I thought was so interesting too is because she did well, she the only thing she had saw was Teddy's feet, but she heard a man screaming, and she also like heard a thud, and obviously you had Imogen kind of taking control of this, which Rufus is trying to stay back and like let her take charge, but kind of giving her pointers. I even love that whole conversation of she's like, oh, earlier she was like, oh, this isn't a master class, and so let's kind of get this done or whatever. And he was like, they did offer me a master class once, and she's like, gross. It's like I love that little exchange, just that line delivery of gross. About him like kind of being like, yeah, they did, I'm so important, they were going to give me a masterclass. But nevertheless, like she had to strike this balance that she was kind of struggling with of like, okay, you want to prompt the witness, but you don't want to lead the witness too much because you're like, oh, you heard a thud, that must have been the harpoon gun. It's like, no, she never said that. You're the one that made the claim about the thud she heard, what being a clank. And I love that Yeva's like, yeah, you did lead me on with that. Like, I love that you're interjecting into all of this. And so like, right, she's trying to figure out that balance, once again, just like Rufus is leading her on because he sees what she's capable of, because he doesn't, I think for him, it isn't just about solving this himself. I think it's important about her finding her way through this, finding her voice as a detective. Because I didn't talk about it last episode, but him and Hilde were having this whole conversation about detectives being a dying breed because of where technology is today, which seems to be something they're going to be implementing more, because they were talking about, hey, despite all of the extensive background checks that Sunil and his staff ran, Jules was, that's the day and age we're living in, digital day and age, that you can become a new person, a few keystrokes. So that conversation coming up, I think is really interesting. But then you also, so just tying that back into the larger conversation of, oh yeah, like detectives like them, like more on the boots on the ground, like active like detectives in that regard, investigators, is kind of a dying breed in a lot of ways, and he's trying to keep that alive because he sees that Imogen has the potential. He's seen that potential in her years and years ago, and that's why I was like, I still, they never really going over it, but it feels like they've insinuated like Danny was in the same boat. I think I brought that up in like episode 2. It felt like they were kind of insinuating there's kind of a similar like tutelage situation there as well. I brought this up last episode that I thought was so interesting, that Jules decided not to rat on Imogen even though he had the perfect alibi, and he kind of clarified why he did that this episode, because he was like, right, just because I was in a position, because like, yeah, he knew like you stole my code, you deleted the footage. He already confronted her about that in episode 2, wasn't it? And so he already had all that details, but he never said anything to Interpol, because I think maybe it's kind of that criminal code of like, he doesn't think he knows she did something, but he knows like you didn't. I know you enough to know you didn't kill Keith, and so for him it's like kind of maybe that criminal code of like, yeah, but you did something, but I'm not going to throw you under the bus, because just to spare myself, I'm not going to throw someone else under the bus. So it makes me wonder, like, is that kind of maybe some of the charges he has on his rap sheet? Makes me almost wonder, like, once again, we know he has a twin, so could he have taken the fall for a twin in the past? So something that he was actually not responsible for, he took the fall for. So maybe that's what it, maybe that's kind of built off of that. Speculation on my part. Because like I said, there's just so much in that, his backstory we hadn't tackled yet, that I didn't even think about until like he's still on the boat at the end of the episode. I was like, oh yeah, like there's still so much of your story we still don't know, So like I said, like whether or not this family was the main reason why you set all this in motion to get on Sunil's boat, or did you have other reasons? Which that in itself is enough reason for Sunil to like get involved, him and Teddy, because it's like, yeah, if they dock and the stowaways are found out, it's going to blow back on them. And Teddy's like, I like my job, and obviously Sunil sunk a lot of money into this ship, so it's like, I need this all to work out. But speaking of Teddy, because we know the truth about her circumstances. We now found out that Winnie had lied. Now, Winnie doesn't know that she's a dominatrix, so why was Winnie lying? Because, like, there's no way, because she wasn't lying to cover for her sister, because no one knows about her proclivities. Which is so interesting, too, because she was calling out Layla for her peculiarities, and it turns out you got your own little secrets of your own. Once again, everyone does. It goes back to the point that Rufus was making, that just because someone has a secret doesn't necessarily make them complicit or part of this grand scheme and the murder / murders, if you're throwing in Image's mom, which this is all connected to as well. Once again, that still goes back to my point from like episode 2. We don't know, or I might say this episode 2 or episode 1, but the whole point of, we don't know whether Keith got killed, well, Danny got killed because of stuff related to him being Keith, and maybe he was found out not to be who he claimed to be, or is it because he's Danny, like, and he was investigating stuff, which side of things got him killed. Which, later on, when Winnie, they did the whole thing, the rigmarole of arresting Teddy, make it seem like they found their killer, and Winnie, wanting to protect her sister, confessed to the murder, which I'm like, you didn't actually do it. But she knew enough details, being like, did you actually do it? But then later on, which we'll get to later, Layla said that, no, you didn't catch the killer, you just caught one of his followers. Because the way she was going off on this not monologue, but she was going off on this, like, manifesto speech of, like, yeah, they won't control us, they won't own us, or stuff. I was like, where the fuck is that coming from? But it's like, she was like, yeah, like, Keith, like, she killed Keith because he, like, not because he didn't apologize, because he yelled at her, he was an asshole. It's like, no, it was a bigger thing. It's like, almost like a, let's kill the rich, eat the rich type of situation. Well, I'm like, is that what this is about? Because she, like, specifically has an issue with everyone on this boat, the powerful people. It's like, yeah, you get your nose punched and you don't, you go through life thinking there are no consequences because you have enough money to get away with everything. So everyone in this boat might be more of a target than potentially a co-conspirator in all this, maybe. I don't know. Well, because the whole thing is Lawrence apparently blackmailed Victor Sands. So it's, so he might be on the list, and she just had, I mean, to be fair, like, he hasn't left his room since Danny got murdered, so, but I think it's so interesting, too, because of what Winnie says, that kind of goes back to my point of, she doesn't know that Danny is Danny. Because to most people, he's still Keith, so she took him as, like, the persona he played, but it also goes to a point I brought up, too. The killer most likely saw him, like, the person who was hiding in the cart, it's a red herring, that's not the actual killer. Maybe they were there planning on killing Keith, but they saw who the real killer is, and especially with what Layla said, like, she's not the killer, she's the follower. So either that's kind of like in the grand scheme of, because the whole correlation, and Rufus had said this last episode too, just because the killer in this case might not directly correlate to Imogen's mom's death. I mean, it's all connected, sure, but it's just one of his followers. So it's like, so he's some kind of, like, kill the rich type of cult leader or something. Because they did kind of make it seem like this revolves around some powerful organization, but I kind of ignored a lot of those details. I shouldn't have, but I wasn't expecting the story to get that big in some criminal organization you're going to be tackling, because I thought we were just looking for one killer, but it's a part of a larger system of things, which almost makes me go like, is this just, actually, once again, I assumed this was a one-off, but I don't know. Nothing I've seen said necessarily miniseries, because usually IMDb is really good about saying, so, like, there might be a larger, like, no, this isn't meant to be a one and done. I think I assumed it was, but we're also getting this from the perspective of a book, which, hey, there are multiple books, so, like, maybe the end of this season will be like, it's the end of this case in this book, but it's part of a duology or a trilogy type of thing. It depends on how the season wraps up and plays out. But like I said, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, it does seem like Winnie might have answered my question of, like, Keith getting killed might have been, like, a Keith thing. Not unless she was left in the dark thinking, like, either she's hiding her true motive or she's at least coming at... So maybe, like, she wasn't asked to kill Keith. Maybe she killed Keith because she thought like, right, it falls in line with their philosophy. If she did it, like I said, my theory was like also that whoever hid in there wasn't necessarily the killer. They actually saw the real killer. Just like she's able to say all the stuff about Imogen because she actually was in there. So she's like, oh, I saw her smash the watch and also drop the bow gun. You wouldn't know details like that unless you were specifically, and like she saw exactly what she did. And I think she even referenced like her stealing cash from him, or at least someone else did. So it's enough for Hilde to be like, yeah, it's all, once again, she got her killer, got her confession, she's good, but it doesn't quite fit. And so later on, when Rufus ran into Layla, I was actually kind of scared. I was like, Layla's not about to do something to him. But then she references Danny, which I'm like, so you know who he really is. She's like, so you didn't hear from Danny? And he's like, oh, well, of course you wouldn't have had a chance to. So that must mean, why did Danny go to her? I guess like any situation, you need an assistant. And part of me was like, is Layla his assistant? Or do they have deeper connections than we realize? So I was like, that confrontation they had in the hallway, I was like, was that all for show, or was that real? And then Danny eventually reached out to her for her to know the No Keep's name really is Danny, because they've kept that tight lip that no one on the ship, other than potentially the real killer, would know who Danny really was. So now I'm like, when would he have had a chance? Like after that? But why would he approach her? Maybe he felt like she was the one that he could trust the most because she's so detached from all this. She is a little paranoid and stuff. Or was it not only Keith? Like, was she also? I mean, God, Danny. If it was not just Danny, is Layla playing a role too? I don't know. Especially because she had that interaction when Danny was killed, where Layla was like, "Oh, I feel bad for his family," and it was like, we all do. She kind of felt like it was a little off, her wife's reaction. But it's like, Layla's good at not, like, conveying a lot. Like, she just looks crazy to everyone. But, that once again, that might be her playing into the role. Maybe she was actually a lot more upset about Danny's death than she kind of let on. Once again, we don't know how deep that connection is. Is it like a super recent connection? Like, why is she down here? How did she discover the secret compartment? Did Danny... Is the reason why she knows is because, is that where her and Danny would meet up to actually talk away from cameras and stuff like that? I just don't know. So many questions on that front. Speaking of Anna, her and Catherine hook up. I was like, I was kind of bummed out. But it's like, once again, your marriage is kind of a little rocky right now. And you actually on some level wonder if your wife has something to do with this. Because when it all popped off, Anna was kind of like, right, we got to get out of here because Rufus is on board. There's also Interpol that's going to start getting involved. We need to kind of jump on top of this situation, which made me felt like they did have something to hide. I just don't know. Like, specifically trying to get your... I mean, to be fair, you have your business deal. You don't want to get in the middle of all this, but you kind of were dragged into it. So, but I was thinking, like, why were you trying to bail immediately? It feels like it has to be that reason alone, because your name associated with this, your business is already in shambles. Like, the last thing you need is your association with a murder investigation to kind of like sink your business even more. So maybe that's all there was to it. It just felt like she was specifically kind of like trying to protect Layla in some regards. So I was like, there's some correlation with the accident, or that's still a big enigma about Layla that we don't know about that accident, the details of it, her perspective on things. I'm assuming we'd get at some point in time soon. But I think it's interesting that it's like, oh, we're only halfway through the story. And he's like, oh, the rest of it isn't... I forgot what the exact wording was that Rufus used at the end of the episode, saying, like, it's not going to be, like, footnotes for the rest of the book. Like, no, there's still plenty more story to tell. And I'm excited to see where it all kind of goes from here. Oh, I also forgot a little detail we found out is Grandma Chun... turns out that she knows about the priest and his affair, which even he's like, you're gonna blackmail a priest? It's like, yo, Grandma Chun is a gangster like that. Because it's like, yeah, like, oh, I know about you and Catherine because we do our due diligence. Because they'd made a point in episode 2, specifically Eleanor did, saying like, right, we hired you to get dirt on the Colliers, but you haven't really delivered. It's like, which is so interesting considering they've got their own network of dirt. So it's like, what do you even need Rufus for. But I guess it's like you work with them close enough. You're a great detective. Like you're gonna pick up on stuff that other like investigators and other people won't be able to really like dig up. So I guess that's what it is. Like he could give you even juicier dirt because of who he is and his occupation. But obviously, like he needed the work with the Chuns to be an end. It was his way to get on this boat, obviously. Because there was no other way he was going to be able to get onto this boat otherwise. But yeah, I'm curious. Well, because she's pumping the priest for information against the Colliers, so Grandma's making moves, and what those moves necessarily entail, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But I'm excited to see where some of these turn of events take us. I'm curious how long Sunil and Imogen are going to be off the boat. I'd assume not for too long, considering they're only off there long enough to drop off the stowaways. And I guess because Hilde never actually found them, she's probably not going to be too concerned about it. She'd heard about the stowaways, but she's not going to get too caught about it. Whatever got the killer got Jules, so he distracted him long enough for Sunil to take all of them off. But yeah, like I'm you know, he'd even said something to Sunil saying like, "Hey, I see the way she looks at you. Don't fuck it up." Because obviously, like we still haven't gotten into his Sunil's ex situation, because it's like there was something him and Imogen talked about. So maybe we'll find out more about whatever that ex situation is. Maybe it'll be prominent. Maybe it won't. I mean, to be fair, that situation eventually led to him down the route that he's on right now. But it's going to be interesting. There's just so many details and elements to this. I'm excited to see unfold and unravel over the course of the season. I'm excited to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.